Liberation theology then, top first box, is for what is it? What is liberation theology? Liberation theology focuses on action first, orthopraxy or right practice rather than belief, orthodoxy and right belief. Now, immediately this opens up an essay where you can evaluate, because that is a very, very good thing. What it's recognising is action is more important than just having a belief. A lot of practices that we look at just promote thinking about doing the right thing, thinking about things using your conscience, making the right decisions, whereas this is specifically talking about acting upon those decisions, not just having a belief in God or a belief in whatever it might be. This is about acting upon it, so orthopraxy over orthodoxy. It requires Christians to reflect critically on their experiences in life, and it focuses on the experiences of the poor and sees Christianity as an opportunity to respond to poverty and other examples of exploitation and alienation in the world. This topic is about words: poverty, exploitation, alienation. And so with this is about focusing upon using those words and applying them properly. So this argument is very, very interesting, because it's not just focusing on, again, promoting belief or converting others to Christianity. It is about focusing on the people that are poor, the people that need that help and support. Obviously, liberating them from poverty. It's a theory linked with Karl Marx, 19th century German economic theorist, and his analysis of capitalism. Capitalism, according to Marx, creates a world in which the wealth and power are concentrated in the hands of the few at the expense of the many. How this coverall is going to work is you are going to have what is capitalism. Also, first of all, what is liberation theology? What is capitalism? And Marxism? And then how does this idea of liberation theology and Marxism connect? So we're doing each one separately, then together. Box underneath then is split into two. One half for the top box, one half for the bubble underneath. Where did it all begin then? This was a theological movement that began in 1964, so we're talking about quite a recent development, when young Catholic theologians met in Brazil and vowed to find what the true Christian message was in the face of poverty in Latin America. This is about seeing a problem. The problem is the poverty in Latin America. There's an image there of the poverty. That's a recent picture. This poverty is still there. And so they met in Brazil, and as Christians promoting this orthopraxy, they thought, what can we do about it? It is therefore both an intellectual movement but also a practical one. Two members of the group became leading liberation theologians, John Sobrino and Gustavo Gutierrez. So Sobrino and Gutierrez being the main one we'll look at. So that bit goes in the first of the two boxes. The bubble underneath is for Paulo Freire, and so that bit goes on the side. He says liberation theology drew on the work of Paulo Freire, who coined the term conscientization. This is when a person becomes aware of the power structures in society. Conscientization sounds very much like conscientia, like Aquinas' conscience in action idea. Again, it does look very much like conscience as well. So this is when you are conscious, if you like, or conscious of the power structures in society. For Freire, education was not the movement of knowledge from one person to the next, but about finding ways to transform society. This argument is about making those changes Bob Geldof style. We're talking about changing the world. We're wanting to actually do something with meaning. And so what they really focus on is finding ways to transform society, specifically a society that is in depths of poverty. Please do make sure that you focus on things like your dates. 1964, recognise that it is quite a recent movement. Do know that it is started by Catholic theologians, so it is a religious Christian movement. Also recognise, obviously, it is in Brazil. They met in Brazil to help with the poverty in Latin America. Box underneath, the thin bit along the top is for the bit in white, and you'll see where the two boxes underneath come in a second. So the long thin box is for this bit. What does liberation theology promote then? It is the concept of the kingdom of God. This is central to liberation theology. It is the world made anew, not where you go when you die. Very, very important. This is not the kingdom of heaven as in, kingdom of God, sorry, as in heaven. This is not where you go when you die. It is about what you do here in this world. It is making this world anew, transforming this world. So the coming of the kingdom of God is something that we must be hoped and worked for in this world. And then the two boxes underneath are for the two approaches of Gutierrez. So you can write the top part in whichever of the boxes you want, or you can just write it between the boxes if you've got space. For Gutierrez, liberation happens in two ways, so you've got the little arrows separating them. The first way, there must be social and economic liberation, society and money within society. Poverty and oppression are caused by humans and can be alleviated by them. People must take responsibility and act. Second, people must be liberated from sin, reconciled with God and all of God's brothers and sisters in Christ. Again, this is very, very important. What he's arguing is, very interestingly, oppression and poverty are caused by us. They are caused by humans, and something that is caused by humans can then be prevented by humans. So first comes social and economic help, and then people start turning to God to liberate themselves from their own sin. If anybody gets lost or stuck, please let me know. Box underneath is for the next slide. So where does it come from then? Where does Marxism come in? The more humans have power to control the world, the more they feel they are not in control at all. So the more control we have, the less in control we feel. Marx's writings, most famously the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, often reflect these feelings. Marx believed these three things. It is human activity behind the experiences of powerlessness, so this feelings of alienation is caused by us. Humans do not have a fixed nature but have to work to survive. Unlike animals, we are conscious of our work and can develop new ways of doing things. So basically we are not just animals, because we can work out new ways of doing things, but we do this in order to survive. You've got a nice quote in the dollar sign, Masha Gessen. It turned out that capitalism alone could make people not only rich and happy, but also poor, hungry, miserable and powerless. The more money we have, the more power we have, the more unhappy we seem to become. But is that because the few have it versus the many? Or is it because the more powerless you feel? For the box underneath, will you please split the box in half? This is where it gets slightly confusing. You're going to have to squeeze 2 slides into the next box, which I apologise about, but you can summarise the slides quite briefly. So the box underneath, separate that into 2. So either do it physically with a line, or just keep it in your brain, or you can just squish it all into one box. It doesn't matter. But basically there are 2 slides coming up of basically how does capitalism happen and what are Marx's views on capitalism. So please, with the next bit, summarise it as briefly as you possibly can, because at the end of the day you don't have to go into great depths and content detail about Marxism. So do summarise this, but you do have to get 2 slides into the next very small box, so do split it down the middle if you wish. How does capitalism happen then? However, when human society reaches a point in that it creates a surplus, this means more resources are produced than what's needed for the direct community, it begins to fracture. Class divisions emerge between those who have control over the means of producing the surplus and those that do not. And I'll just put it up there so you can see where we're going. So that bit goes into half of the box. You don't need to go into this much detail, but for some of you, you won't have any clue how capitalism happens. So basically, when you have an excess, more than what your community needs, you then have a split in classes. You have the people that own the excess and the people that don't own the excess or the surplus. And so this is evident through ownership of land. You have the feudal lords, the lords. These are the people that own the land, and so they have the means to produce food and make money from that. The serfs are the people that work the land but do not own it. Therefore, they're relying on the lords to access to the land and must give surplus back to them. This means the serfs are alienated from the land and subservient to the lords. So basically, the serfs keep working the land. Any extra that they work, they then have to give back to the lords. So the lords don't only have the land, they get the money and the excess for the surplus. And so the serfs always remain the serfs. They can never get enough money to get themselves out of that position because they're always giving it back to the lords. And so they feel alienated by it and subservient to them. If anyone does need a post-it note, please let me know. So as I said, what capitalism is, how it happens, how Marxism links into it. This is a lot of this is if you haven't done sociology, for example. A lot of this is if you don't know Marxism or capitalism. And so this isn't what you have to go into great depth and detail about in your exam. It's just so that you know it. The bits that are going to be on the other side of the sheet are going to be the bits you really need to learn and focus, the bits from Gutierrez, etc. So within the same box, please, Marx's views on capitalism then. So what does Marx say about it? Capitalism, which is an economic system in which the means of production is privately owned and operated for profit. So basically private owners, and it's operated for profit. Change the relationship between people and production resulted in social division, the wealthy owners versus the workers. There's been a lot of conflict recently with the Scarborough Council for things like the privately owned swimming pool now, hence why they can charge so much to go to the outdoor swimming pool, because it's privately owned. People write to the council to complain, they say there's nothing they can do because it's privately owned, which means that they can charge you whatever they want. Same with the indoor swimming pool and the sports centre, the active centre. That is privately owned, which means that they can basically do whatever they want. So I think they've just stopped a charity event that we've been running for years, and the council said there's nothing they can do. Why? Because it's privately owned. Privately owned means they can charge whatever they want, they can ask whatever rules and set whatever rules they want, and we have no power over that, we have no say. And so this is where capitalism happens on a very low level, but it is happening within our society. According to Marx, workers cannot work independently of capitalism. You can't get away from it. You're either working for somebody else's money, you're working to make someone else money, they get rich and you still get your minimum wage or whatever it might be. To work means to be part of a capitalist machine. It is a living death. Labour becomes forced because of the need to work for money and thus food. And so this is the idea that you have to work in order to get food and to get money for food. And so it's a living death. You're alive, but you're just doing the same thing over and over again. And so, for example, again, apologies for your space, just do what you can. The rest of it will be easier. Look at factory systems, for example, we had a look at the apple production line, where the stage of the production is separated. They did one small thing every single day for hours and hours over and over and over again. And so they might have cut out the apple on the back of an iPad, they might have been taking off the protective screen, whatever it is. People only relate to that part of the process they are working on. They are dehumanised and unable to live fulfilling lives because they are exploited by the factory owners as a means to an end. Again, the word dehumanised, really important. The people in that little documentary we watched about Apple said that the girl they interviewed at the end said she'd never actually seen a working iPad, but she'd worked on that part over and over again. She was alienated from the product she'd made. They're dehumanised and unable to fill fulfilling lives because they don't have enough money to get out of there. They had to live in bunks together. They didn't have enough money to get home to their families. And so they're basically just working to live and nothing more. You can bring this into business ethics, that's absolutely fine. Nice links to business ethics. Box underneath is for the problems then. The problems with capitalism. Marx predicted the emergence of a class struggle between the different groups in society, and eventually, in order to create a fairer society, those who were oppressed would begin to violently resist the structures that alienate them. Basically, there would be a revolt, there'd be a revolution, there'd be a reform. The people that were getting worked hard would push against the system. Capitalism means everyone seizes the produce of others, alienating them from their own labour. So again, do you even think of the people that made your Apple product? Probably not. So not only are the people in it from their work, we're alienated from the people that make it. And so our happiness comes at a price. The exploitation of others for cheap labour, because we are part of the supply chain. We are also dehumanised. We are the consumers. We are so consumed with consumerism. The want, the need. And so we are also dehumanised as part of the process. We are dehumanised from the people that make it, from the products themselves. You're doing really well, everybody. We've got one more slide on liberation and Marxism, and then we go into liberation theology and what it actually is and how it uses this. Doing really well, everybody. Let's start making the links then between capitalism and Marxism and liberation theology. And so, the emergence of liberation theology and links to Marxism. Latin America was an underdeveloped part of the world where many people lived in poverty and still do. It was at a crossroads. Stick with capitalism or choose socialism. This ideological battle impacted general elections, caused violence and revolutions. Socialist governments were overthrown with the help of the USA, and communist-led rebel movements. They were in dire need of help. They were in a time when conflict was the norm between two battles, capitalism and socialism. So general elections were corrupt. Obviously, they wanted to remain capitalist. They wanted to keep the money at the top. So with this one, you don't need to know the great political depths of it. You just need to know that it was serious. What the problems that they were having and the violence that was being shown was serious. The violent uprising that Marx had predicted seemed to be happening in Latin America. This led to liberation theology, a focus on increasing human well-being, not wealth. So what Marx had predicted was happening in Latin America. This idea of the system pushing back, the system saying no. And so this is where liberation, so as you can see, this is what we've been building up to. This is where liberation theology came in because of the capitalism, because of Marx's predictions that it was always going to happen. Liberation theology then formed out of it in 1964. As soon as you're happy, turn over your sheet. Have we got? Yeah. Excellent. We've got a few slides left to go, and they're quite chunky slides, but they shouldn't take us too long now. The first part of it seems quite the heavy part. So you've got two large boxes at the top now. They are for Gutierrez, who is key. The two boxes underneath are going to be for the preferential option for the poor. So basically everything now on this side is very, very important. This is what you do need to focus on and learn. So the first of your large boxes at the top is for Gutierrez. For Gutierrez, being Christian requires a person to be political. The church must be a voice against alienation and exploitation, requiring orthopraxis before orthodoxy. This is very Bonhoeffer-esque. This is, you can really see these ideas of practice over belief, this idea of political. You can also see it in the person of Jesus topic, Jesus as a political liberator. So all of these topics you can bring in as well if you see those links. Thus, working to change people's lives for the better should come before concerns about the official doctrines and teachings of the church. Now, I think that is a brilliant point. What he is arguing is that you should put people's lives before, oh, well, what does the Bible say? Oh, what does this document say? Let me write to the Synod of the Church of England to ask them a question about missionaries, etc., like Paul Eddy does. No, this is saying, stop looking to the official doctrines, stop looking to the teachings of the church, and start doing something to make changes to people's lives. Very powerful stuff. Easier said than done, of course, but at least they have the right intention. The Marxist analysis of structural inequality, which we embrace structural inequality. So structural, like the class system, inequality because it's not equal, informs liberation theology's concept of structural sin. This is where you accept the injustice suffered by the poor and oppressed masses. So we are all part of this structural sin. We accept that there are people with lots of money and there are people with none. And so Marx says these two things. You don't have to worry about the numbers. That's all that goes in that first box. Marx says the understanding of the development of capitalism, so the means of production in the hands of the wealthy and powerful, and the belief that humans can change the world they live in. Both of these points are very, very important. It's both of these two views that forms liberation and impacts liberation theology. So one, capitalism, where the wealthy and the powerful, or the wealth and the power goes to a few over the many, and that we have the power to change that. And so for liberation theology, those were the two most important parts of Marxism that they took from it. It's also a refreshing argument, is this one. You get so used to always pointing the finger, always saying, why does God not help? Where's God when this happens? Why is God not helping the poverty? And what this is arguing is, no, we caused it, we can do something about it. This isn't for God to spread out money more equally. This isn't for God to feed the starving. This is about us doing something about it. So it's quite refreshing in that it's not just passing the blame, it's saying actually no, let's take the reins and the control. I like liberation theology, there's just a lot of it. Excellent. Box to the side, doing really well everyone, stay focused. Gutierrez continued then, so the bit at the top is for the bit, the bubble is for the little separated bit underneath. Gutierrez, however, cautions against endorsing every aspect of Marxism. This is very important. What he's saying is, Marxism at the end of the day did not support religion. Please do not think that Marxism held a banner. Marx did not hold a banner saying loving religion. No, Marx was against religion. And so Gutierrez warns against endorsing all of Marxism. But he believed that the people of Latin America had a deep-rooted desire for liberation from the burdens of capitalism, which is what Marx promoted and what Marx predicted. Thus, liberation theology, this is from Boff and Boff in Introduction to Liberation Theology, really nice quote. Liberation theology freely borrows from Marxism certain methodological pointers that have proved fruitful in understanding the role of the oppressed. Brilliant quote. Even if you just remember methodological pointers. What that's saying is, it's taken some methodology from Marxism. It's taken some ideas, so the ideas of, this is capitalism, this is what capitalism leads to, we have the power as humans to change it. They are the methodological pointers taken, not the religion should be got rid of, as Marx always also continues. Liberation theology concluded that capitalism failed to satisfy the basic needs of the poor, and although socialism may not be a perfect solution, the socialist is better than the capitalist ideal. The appeal to Marxist ideas can be summed up as, and this is where you go into the little bit underneath. This is from Fitzgerald. He said, according to liberation theology, capitalism has clearly been incapable of satisfying basic needs in Latin America, despite the fact that government and business leaders are professed Christians. I think that quote is brilliant. Fitzgerald is calling them out. What he's arguing there is that capitalism, making the rich rich and the poor poor, and that separation and that gulf bigger between them, is not satisfying the basic needs of Latin America. Of course it's not, because the majority are poor. Whilst the government and the business leaders, the ones making all the money, are professed Christians. What he's digging at there is, they're saying, we're Christian, and what he's saying is, well, you're certainly not acting like one. And so they're basically saying, well, we're Christians, we're good people. And what Fitzgerald's calling them out there is saying is, well, you're certainly not acting upon it. Where's the help thy neighbour? Where's the help for the poor like what Jesus did? How can you be a Christian whilst you sit on your big bags of money while the rest of society is poor? Again, bring in the eye of the camel idea. It's harder for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than the rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Bring all of that in. Blessed are the poor in spirit, or the pure of heart. Bring in the beatitude. If you see a link, bring it in. Four slides left. You're doing really, really well. The next two slides where we're going is for the preferential option for the poor. Very, very central to this argument. So the two large boxes is for the core of this. Then the final sections will be the criticisms towards liberation theology and what the church, especially the Catholic Church, what it says about it. So, moving into the two large boxes. The first, so liberation theology's teachings on the preferential option for the Pope. This was first used in 1968 by Father Pedro Arrupe, again apologies for pronunciation, who was the Superior General of the Jesuits and was picked up by the Catholic bishops of Latin America. The title, not him. I don't know, I don't think that makes it sound like he was picked up by them. But the term, this idea, the preferential option for the Pope, was a term first used by him. It refers to the trend in the Bible which shows preference for individuals who are on the margins of society who are powerless, and the way that Jesus associated himself with those that are poor and dispossessed. And so, preferential option for the poor does exactly what it says on the tin. It's preferring the poor. It's helping the poor. Why? Because the Bible says it and Jesus did it. So the Bible always looked at people on the margins of society. Don't forget, a margin on a paper is the outside. It's people on the outside. And Jesus himself always associated with the people that were poor and dispossessed. Jesus never helped or went with the people that were rich, powerful in society. This became a central theme of liberation theology. Juan Segundo argues that Christians should not maintain an attitude of neutrality in the face of tragic and pressing problems of human misery and injustice. There he is. He writes that the Church intends to struggle by her own means for the defence and advancement of the rights of mankind, especially the poor. Just going to change that, apologies, into white because I think it'll be easier for you to see on your screen. That's a bit better, isn't it? A bit clearer. So what Segundo is arguing there is that Christians should not maintain an attitude of neutrality. They shouldn't just stay neutral. They shouldn't just stay in the middle on their nice comfy fence when faced with tragic and pressing problems with misery and injustice. He says the church intends to struggle. The church needs to struggle in order to defend and move forward mankind, especially the poor. Segundo differed from Gutierrez. This is a really nice point, is this one. Segundo, on the one hand, argued that you have to liberate from sin first. So Gutierrez, if you remember, had the 1 and the 2. Gutierrez said, first comes social and economic, then comes liberation from sin. Segundo says the opposite, total opposite. Focus on liberation of sin first, then change social and political structures. So what he's arguing is it's easy to change the individual before trying to change the society. You can decide who's right. Do you go for big, then narrow it, or do you go from small, then go up? You can discuss and argue in your exam which approach you think is more logical. Maybe neither, maybe we don't know. Totally up to you how you take it. You alright, Elvis? So all of that goes in the big box.
The same sort of views though, they just want a different way around doing it.
Oh yes, so exactly the same views, but Gutierrez says you should focus on the big picture first, then that will help the individuals. He's saying no, the big picture is far too hard to deal with. You should focus on the individuals first, and then that will essentially change the big picture. Yeah. Box to the side, you're doing ever so well, everyone. Liberation theology continued on the preferential option for the poor. Just as God is the defender and liberator of the poor and oppressed, so liberation theology has a special concern for the poor and oppressed, and it urges people to action. Well, of course, it's because it's about orthopraxy, not orthodoxy. So what that is saying is God defended and liberated the poor and oppressed. Think about Moses. Moses was sent in order to free the Israelites from the Egyptian slavery. It was always about liberating the poor and oppressed from the people that oppressed them. And so liberation theology's aim is to do the same, is to liberate the poor and oppressed and urging people to action. In 1991, Pope John Paul II used the term in his encyclical Centesimus Annus, which was written on the celebrate the 100th anniversary of Pope Leo, saying, "I defined as a special form of primacy in the exercise of Christian charity." Basically, what that's saying is in that encyclical, which means 100, so it's done in for the anniversary, 100th anniversary. It's recognised this importance of Christian charity. He goes on to say that the preferential option for the poor constitutes a great opportunity for moral, cultural and even economic growth of humanity. However, he made it clear this is not just about material or economic poverty. He also talks about spiritual poverty. So the importance of this bit from Pope John Paul II is that he recognises that the preferential option for the poor is not just about poor in money, it's about poor in spirit, spiritual poverty. Spiritual poverty is something that can be caused by overemphasis on material goods and consumerism, writing drugs as well as pornography and other forms of consumerism which exploit the frailty of the weak, tend to fill their resulting spiritual void. Following his election in 2013, Pope Francis, our current Pope, developed this thinking even further, rejecting the trappings of papal luxury, papal Pope, his Pope luxuries, and challenging the Catholic Church to be a poor church for the poor. That last point, because I know you'll be starting to get really tired now, so you're doing ever so well. That last point there is very, very important. I don't see how you can really justify a liberation theology essay without mentioning Pope Francis, because he is, I don't want to say is the first pope, because there probably is another pope in there somewhere, but he is one of the only popes to say, actually, we're promoting help for the poor, yet I'm dripping in gold, I've got my fancy car with all the security, I've got all this luxury, and you're expecting me to preach with an honest face, go and give money to charity and help the poor, and look at me. And so what he said is, no, I am not going to get trapped within all of this luxury. And he either stopped using things like his private vehicles unless he had to. So he was known to, I think he even had drives a little Fiat or something, a real small car. But he said he's not doing it. He wants to not get trapped within those luxuries. So again, this orthopraxy, not orthodoxy, he's practicing what he's preaching. Three slides left, then we'll have a little break.
Which pope was it that
Pope Francis. The final part of this page in the PowerPoint is basically the Catholic responses and the further criticisms. The rest of the slides should be slightly easier to digest. These are quite big ones, but very important stuff, very important. All right, so box underneath, the Catholic Church's response to liberation theology. The Catholic Church became concerned with liberation theology's use of Marxist theories. Cardinal Ratzinger, who then became the Pope, articulated the Catholic disquiet. He argued, and there he is, so all of this goes in that box, that box underneath. He argued that the Catholic Church will continue to struggle for the poor, but using its own means and its own ways. Christianity cannot adopt a Marxist analysis without changing from a Christian worldview to a Marxist worldview, because Marxism is inherently unchristian. Now, what Cardinal Ratzinger is saying there is quite fair. What he's saying is for Christianity to adopt a Marxist ideology, you're moving from a Christian core to potentially an atheistic core, because at the end of the day, Marxism was against or did not support religion. And so what he says is, at the end of the day, Marxism is inherently, to the core, inside, unchristian, and that the church will do it its own way for the poor, which he said while dripping in gold. So on the one hand, what he's saying is fair, in that Christianity cannot necessarily side itself with something that's inherently unchristian. But on the other side, was the church really doing all it could to help the struggle with the poor? That again is something you can question. And he says, let us recall the fact that atheism and the denial of the human person is his liberty and rights are the core of Marxist theory. So what he's saying is, this idea of liberty and rights is at the core of Marxism, which is atheistic. It's an atheist theory. Please don't forget that next Tuesday will be a second mock. That will be our philosophy mock, including AS and A2 content. So please be revising nature of God and your religious languages. We will probably be able to do one of the religious languages tomorrow afternoon, the coveralls. We're not doing nature of God. It's a biggie. So we'll leave that till next week. But you need to be revising now your philosophy, ready for your philosophy mock on Tuesday. Box underneath then, further criticisms. The top scroll part is for the first box, and then the two bits underneath are for the box to the side. But you can separate them as you wish. Kloppenberg, in Temptations for Theology of Liberation, argues that by equating theology with political action, one sidelines the spiritual messages of Christianity. So by equating or equalising, putting together theology, study of God, with political action, you are sidelining the spiritual messages of Christianity. Yet Jesus was seen as a political liberator and went up against politics. So don't know quite where he's drawing that conclusion from, that by taking on politics, you're losing your Christian front. It emphasises structural sin over personal sin, despite the fact that Jesus spoke of individual forgiveness and reconciliation with God. So what he's criticising is how liberation theology focuses on structural sin over personal sin. Structural sin allowing these structures to keep going over personal sin, despite the fact that Jesus spoke about individual forgiveness. But Jesus also tried to break down structural sin. So again, I'm not sure where Kloppenberg is going with this one. It places too much emphasis on people being able to deliver liberation and salvation, whereas salvation is a gift from God. Now, that last bullet point there, I think, is a brilliant one to evaluate. He's arguing that liberation theology places too much emphasis on people being able to deliver liberation and salvation, whereas salvation is a gift from God. So what he's saying is Don't bother doing anything because God is the one that saves people. Well, that's all well and good then. We'll just let people be in poverty because we can't deliver liberation and salvation. We all have to wait for God to give us this gift of salvation, maybe in an afterlife. How is that productive within society? Kyle?
Where does liberation theology say that it provides salvation?
Oh yes, so where does liberation theology even bring in salvation? It talks about the kingdom event here rather than salvation and afterlife. Yeah, spot on. Very good, Kyle. In the box to the side, and then you can put the little bit in the white wherever you wish, wherever you have space. Because I obviously started to run out of space on the sheet, as you can see. So the box to the side is for Richard McBrien. In an article written for liberationtheology.org, he adds that liberation theology seems to focus almost exclusively on some biblical themes, poverty and exodus, at the expense of others. It defines oppression in economic terms, ignoring other kinds of oppression that derive from cultural forces such as sexism and racism. Well, it can't do everything. Why not focus on one thing and do one thing well? Liberation theology wants to focus on economic poverty in Latin America, whereas this guy's saying, oh, it should also focus on sexism and racism. For me, this is criticising something that's tried to do some good by saying, well, you should do everything as well at the same time. How? How is it possible? And is it fair to say it ignores other kinds of oppression? Isn't what liberation theology actually saying their aim is to help from poverty as in economic and social problems and structural sin? Whereas what Richard McBrien is arguing is they should also focus on sexism and racism. I personally disagree with that. There's only so much one argument can do. Josh?
Can you argue that racism and sexism are like they come from capitalism because they're basically about oppressing?
Yeah, excellent. So just by actually trying to do something about social and economic poverty would actually then help with things like sexism and racism anyway, because they're all part of it. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Josh. The bit at the bottom was just a bit that was added in. Obviously, I didn't really have space to make a separate part for it. You have to recognise that Pope Francis, the one that said no to his luxuries, is from Latin America. So he is actually from this background. He is a man that was born into this poverty, so knows it firsthand. And so he was elected, he's the first ever Latin American Pope. And so this is where true change might happen. It might not, but it's interesting to recognise that. Final box, we are nearly there. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a chunky one. Does Christianity tackle social issues more effective than Marxism? You could get a question like that in your exam. Basically, which one is better, Marxism or Christianity, or is liberation theology helpful because it takes on Marxism as well? Please summarise this now. Marx believed that there is a struggle at the centre of life which can be seen as true through examples such as child abuse, poverty, human trafficking, poor physical and mental well-being. So Marx saw a struggle at the core of humanity. We see it, we experience it, we know he's correct in that. Christianity can be seen to focus more on the individual struggle than the economic whole, providing more practical help for people struggling with unhappiness and oppression. So what this is saying is, Marxism looks at the big picture, Christianity helps with the individual struggle. Marx does not provide comfort for those who die in the struggle to achieve a classless society, whereas Christianity does offer that help and that support, that spiritual strength, that hope and that solace by teaching that God loves you. Now, you might argue that actually a Marxist approach is better, that you should look to the big picture, and yes, you might lose people, but you are doing massive things. Or you might say actually you need to look and help and support the individuals like what Christianity does. Again, it's your choice how you argue and use this. Marx did recognise that religion was the opiate of the masses. Please be careful using that quote. It is so overused. Your examiners will roll their eyes. This is not somewhere you will impress them, especially because most students that use the quote don't understand what it means. Obviously, opiate comes from the drug opium. Do you know the side effects of opium? No, look it up. So this isn't about making them feel happy. This is about sedating feelings. And so opium makes them feel different about anxieties or things like that. And so Marx is saying that religion is the drug of the masses because it makes them do things in work, keeps going through the system without asking questions. Why? Because the people that own the businesses said, you keep working hard and God will reward you with heaven. That then became their opium. That became their sedation by working, because they always thought we're going to be rewarded in heaven. But the issue that people seem to neglect is, this isn't religion's fault. This is the capitalist owner's fault. They used religion as an excuse to control their workers. This isn't religion trying to control the workers. This was people using religion. But it still is religion being used for a bad end. So please be careful when using that quote, because it is extremely deep in meaning. However, for Marx, this comfort from Christianity, ultimately the belief that they will achieve happiness in heaven, limits people's desires for revolutionary change. Marx did not like Christianity because this idea that it sedates the masses, it keeps them happy because they'll be rewarded with heaven, means they will not revolt against the system. And so at the end of the day, Marx wanted people to be unhappy, so they revolted. And so even if people died, it made mass changes, whereas Christianity supports and helps the individuals, and religion is used as a way to sedate the masses. What you need to think about as well is, do you think Christianity just limits people from acting upon their oppression? Or do you think Christianity is effective? And so do you think it is just a way of sedating people to just get on with life? Or, well, at least I'll live properly in heaven. Or do you think it is effective? Are there any questions? I'm so impressed, everyone. That one was a real tough one. Very, very well done.